So thanks everyone for joining, and I appreciate the committee giving me 10 minutes of kind of promotional lead-in time, but I'm pleased to discuss a little bit about master trials. It was interesting that about an hour before I came on, there was a webinar on master trials by Citi, the CTTI consortium, and I have to acknowledge I kind of looked at that just to see what the leaders in the space were saying relative to master trials and how to operationalize them. And what I wanted to just let the group know, and it's a little bit self-promotional, is that they were discussing the concepts behind it, how to potentially start one up. One of them was in ALS, a very worthy discipline, and another one was in Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. One had just started enrolling, and the other one was still in the planning stages. And what I'm going to spend time talking about is a program that was up and running in 2015. So we have 5 years, 4 years actually, almost in the clinics now, of actually running these types of clinical trials. And so it's important that I share with you not only what strategically might make sense and the rationale for doing them, but in our particular case, we have a lot of lessons learned, and we really, I think, have been well out in advance of the sector in doing it, and I'm going to spend some time sharing some of those results. But I wrote a pretty, I think, intriguing title, which is, are we really in pharma collaboration mode now? You know, is it an oxymoron? Or is it something we can actually undertake today? And it's clear, they also acknowledge the fact that because of COVID, everyone's now is willing to cooperate, which just makes no sense when you think about what we're really doing here, which is it's all about the patients and trying, in our particular case, finding cures for blood cancer. And you needed a pandemic to say, hey, maybe let's break down these barriers and cooperate. But even when they say let's cooperate, it's a far cry from actually doing so in a way that truly puts the patient first. So I'm going to talk for a little bit about who we are, why we put this program together, some of the backbone behind what are these umbrella-like trials or platform trials. Compare and contrast them with ways that are traditionally done. Think about them in terms of maybe the go forward as opposed to more traditional even phase 1, 2, and 3 trials. Let you understand about where I see the vision of clinical trials going forward, and so much so that when we saw this vision 5 years ago, we were pretty prophetic about where the sector is now, and we believe we actually know where the sector is going again. So you can ask questions, you can debate it, but I think we have a track record right now that says that what we're trying to do and share with these presentations is a way forward. And then finally, a little self-serving link on this particular page to an article I wrote back in early March. Actually, I wrote it in late February. It was published in early March, and it pretty much said we needed a pandemic to figure out what we've been doing for the last 5 years and why it's actually germane to the way clinical trials should be run today. And I urge all of you to take a look at it. It would provide you kind of a blueprint for what I think you can start using in the way you conduct your programs now. I did hit page down. There we go. All right, so this is, sometimes I'll start my talk with a bunch of these quotes, but the bottom line is that it's in vogue right now. The FDA has called to action. Woodcock was earlier in doing so, and more recently last year, Sharpless did it. And it pretty much says we need to change the way we're running these trials. And I'm going to demonstrate a lot of reasons why it's important to actually do it and provide you with results. Why did we actually undertake these? And then what happened as a result of us running the trials this way? And I think that's going to be really germane as you go back and think about your own situations in terms of the way you want to conduct clinical trials, or use novel technologies to help with the execution of trials, not ones that have been kind of retrofitted because there's a pandemic right now, but were purpose-built for the vision that we had of what needs to happen in terms of using next-generation technologies and the way you execute and create best-in-class point solutions that are integrated together to run these clinical trials. So, why LLS and who is LLS? So we're the largest nonprofit dedicated to fighting blood cancers. The goal is to cure them. And we've been around some 70 years, and what we do is we fund life-saving research initiatives. In our particular case that we'll talk about right now, it's in frontline leukemia, but clearly there are other disorders that are equally as important. And if you think about this concept and move it to other disciplines or diseases, it provides you with a blueprint for how we could clearly advance the sectors relative to the conduct of clinical trials in a much more efficient way than what we're running today. Every time I look over that way, it's because it's my clock, and I want to make sure I don't deprive anyone from going and having lunch, because you don't want to be that last presenter between you and lunch or you and the cocktail break later on. So anyway, we've provided a lot of research dollars, and you've probably seen the grants and investigative grants and initiatives for nonprofits, but we decided we had to do something more. So we decided to plan for this actually before 2016, but actually to initiate the program in 2016. And it actually is to look at ways to advance therapeutics for frontline AML, a lethal blood cancer. Pretty much if you're diagnosed with it, you have probably a 5-year survival in a lot of cases, and in fact in the elderly it's even worse. And so unfortunately, the discipline had not kept up with the disease, and so we had to do something as a nonprofit just because of that. We're actually launching another master trial in 2020, later this year, actually fourth quarter. And so what we're trying to just mention to you here is that we're not even on our first master trial, we're on our second. So we have a lot of experience in doing these and know that it works, and that's why we're announcing, new initiatives in this regard. And clearly it's because we have a need, and we can use precision medicine, this term you probably heard right now, to use as a backbone or actually as a strategy for assigning patients to targeted treatments as we move ahead. So this is just a quick reference slide for you. I had mentioned that we had started this back in 2015-16 timeframe. Woodcock wrote the definitive article in 2017 in the New England Journal of Medicine. The guidance documents came out in 2018. So I think the message here is the fact that we didn't wait for the government, we didn't wait for the regulations. We knew that we had to undertake and do something different in the way clinical trials were being conducted. And by our initiative and with our partnership with Pharma and the FDA, you'll see that on another slide, we actually helped to create the discipline and some of the operational basis for how these trials should be done, be executed. And what you're seeing now are a lot of organizations coming in and saying, we're going to spin one of these up, and here's the understanding for how to do it. And we applaud that, because obviously along the way we made mistakes. We didn't know what we didn't know at the time that we initiated them, but we understood that what we had to do had to be different from the way in which clinical trials were conducted until that point in time, and really not advancing any of the curative or extension of survival modalities that we have available now.
And Glenn, sorry to cut you off. It looks like your slides are not advancing.
Okay, what slide do you see? Oh, there you go. Okay, so maybe I'll just do it this way. I think everyone can still read it, and that might be okay. Does that sound right?
That looks better, yes.
Okay, fine. Well, they were advancing for me. I'm not sure about the reason why they were advancing over there. But anyway, you can take a look at the slides. They'll be available to you. And the slide that I'm on now is talking about the fact that we convened back in 2014-15, all of these different disciplines, and said, hey, folks, life's not good for these blood cancer patients. We got to do something better. So let's start doing something where we collaborate and use a nonprofit at the center to make this happen. So clearly you can see that from the subsequent slide that I'll show you that academic institutions, pharma companies, the FDA became our partner, genomic testing, and obviously a lot of vendors came together and said, we're going to do something different. And in fact, I wasn't there, I joined right afterwards, but there was an overflow crowd at one of the major conferences at the hematology meetings. And actually, I think it was over 100 people joined us when we actually convened the concept, and many of them agreed to participate in the program. So this is where this is what it looks like now. Okay, and you can see that this is all around, surrounds LLS, right? We're in the driver's seat. We hold the IND. We cross-file or cross-reference to the pharmaceutical companies that are our partners, the clinical sites that have joined us. The FDA is our partner. We have some really interesting point solutions that we incorporated into our ecosystem. We have some traditional operating vendors that are involved with us. And then we have a CRO called Syneos, who's been partnering with us since inception. And we've all learned along the way. But you can see the number of pharmaceutical companies who have basically said, here's an asset, plug it in to your master trial approach. And this is early on in the development of their assets for frontline AML. And you guys come back to us with the data that basically says you're gonna either fail fast, meaning we're gonna actually know whether it works or not, right? Because the beauty of AML, unfortunately, it's a horrible disease, but we know we can measure outcome, we can measure progress in less than a month, right? It's basically a blood disease. You take labs, you see whether the therapeutics are working or not. You can take the genomics and precision assign them to treatment. So it really lends itself to the availability of precision medicine and targeting approaches in order to benefit the patient going forward. So if you look at this, you can see this is not an easy environment in which to operate and keep everyone informed and happy and collaborative in this process. But that's a subject of another discussion. I'm going to just compare and contrast a little bit and then get maybe more into the economic rationale of why we're doing it and why it's important to collaborate if you're in this space with us. So if you picture that last slide and say, can we run this as if it's a typical clinical trial? And the answer is clearly no, right? And we know that the way in which these trials are executed and the backbone treatments that might be available constantly changes. So if you're just in a singular study, you're not going to be able to dynamically change and be efficient and flexible enough with the way in which we conduct our trials. And clearly, if we let each of these vendors and each of these pharma companies and sites have their way with us, we would have never gotten off the ground, right? But it's important that we collaborate, but still do this under the guise of ICAG6R2 that wasn't even developed at that time that we started, but we knew what was needed relative to how to have the overarching quality management systems and things that we knew were coming down the pipe as backbones to the way we were going to execute. So let's do a quick compare and contrast between the way in which we run master trials and what a traditional clinical trial would look like. So on the left of your screen, you can see that we're actually looking across therapies versus in a singular trial, you have a limited focused mutation and you're actually just doing, if the patient comes in with that particular mutation, you get lucky. If it has a different mutation, you're not doing that clinical trial because you may not have that open relative to that site. So we obviously mentioned to you earlier, we have a self-sustaining model. We can plug and play. We can change as the discipline changes. And obviously that's not going to happen in a singular trial. We also believe we have to train the next generation of junior investigators. We're not interested in professors and chairmen kind of running these programs, albeit we have a medical advisory committee of 3 of the top docs that kind of govern everything. But once we actually execute the programs, we move away and try and train the next generation of trialists. And we allow for novel combinations, right? Remember we said we want pharma to collaborate? Pharma doesn't collaborate. They may a little bit now because of COVID, but when you're looking about a blood cancer, another cancer, and say, let's combine two investigational products, it's rare, right? And you can't do it in a master trial environment, it's easier. And usually don't allow marker negatives, which basically mean, we don't have a predominant mutation, but we want a differentiated treatment for you. You don't get that in a typical singular arm. And obviously we get high throughput screening of the patients as opposed to just looking for a particular singular, predominant mutation. And then just move this forward again and say, okay, well, what's going on with the way in which you run it? Well, we're in a collaborative environment, right? And we need a central hub so that we can execute and keep all of the players, right, informed. So we do that. It's time for us to use eSource upload. Well, we did that 5 years ago, not because of a pandemic now, with a purpose-built tool. So, and so all of these things, I'd like you to think back 3, 4, 5 years ago, or consider using them now because the environment is suitable to doing it, and we have gone ahead and de-risked all of these solutions with the way in which we version them and produce them and rolled with them as, in fact, we executed our program. So EMR to EDC is a whole new topic right now. We've been doing it. How do you do safety reporting across 5 or 10 different studies that are open at the same time? How do you manage these vendors? And clearly we said, you're not going to negotiate on budgets, and we're going to have a singular scientific review board and all these things. But here, let's take a deep dive, and I know I have about 10 minutes, so that's why I'm going with pace right now, and I'm happy to answer questions afterwards or meet with you separately. But let's look at this big picture. Remember, why would you want to set up a program like this if you're a pharma company and join us, right? So before we even created this master trial, we basically created an alliance data set that said we went out and figured out what happens to patients with certain mutations relative to what their outlook would be, what would happen to them over the course of time, so that we would know what therapeutic targets, right, and what would be the outcome relative to making decisions on how to centrally assign these patients to a particular sub-study, right? So we had the alliance data that we sponsored and created, so we had a blueprint of how to go ahead and have decision-making across the various patients and how they presented to us, right? And I don't know if I'm going to go through the whole slide because it's a lot and it's a short amount of time. But we obviously said it's time for us to be at the center of this as a nonprofit, Switzerland, an honest broker, use a lot of the standards that we've created and make it truly patient-centric, right? Central decision based on genomics by best-in-class docs takes out all of the bias that might be going on at the site, how much grants cost. It's all about the patient. And we make these decisions faster, and I would say with more information than a traditional clinical trial. We did. We're not running 10 singular studies. We're running one singular study with 10 sub-studies bolted on. So we'll go into the cost benefits in a few minutes, but you can understand that because of the way we do it, we have one set of PVGs, right, that we do. Obviously, there's a process, there's individual PVGs, but there's a process, and obviously there's centralized training, and we know how to do it across all the sites. And then clearly the obvious benefits. Pharma can't do it alone because we have one oversight group. The overhead is much less than we have 10 individual studies. We clearly have staffing efficiencies because we don't have one project manager for each of the 10 studies, 10 different monitors for each of the 10 studies, and on and on and on. And obviously we get economy of scales with third parties. So if you just look at one particular example, which is to take a look at, when we went ahead and set this up, right? We set it up, clearly it's open label, it's genomic based, it's blood cancer, so we know what the results are. We don't need a placebo group. We can actually eliminate a control arm, right? We don't need that relative to this trial. So if you had 10 individual control arms versus a comparator arm in a sub-study traditional way, it's clear that the cost impact of doing this and eliminating all those control arms with standard of care, which aren't good for the patient and clearly cost more money, just isn't in the best interest of patients. And because we keep using the same sites over and over again, they've already bought in. So we don't have startup, we don't have feasibility, we don't have all of these things, these negotiations, everything else. And because every patient that comes in gets the best possible match to a clinical trial, now at a center, because all centers have to participate, it clearly enrolls much faster than a one-off clinical trial at a site. So where's the proof? Okay, so what we did was we went and we looked at what it cost us to run the program relative to running 10 individual programs of the same size at the same CRO with the same assumptions. And here's what we found. So this isn't hypothetical. This is real, right? And I'm not going to give you the precise data. I'll be the subject of a different presentation and publication. But you can see that the intuitive and obvious cost savings have borne out relative to the slide here based on the key areas, right? In some areas, you would expect dramatic savings. In other areas, you would expect some, right? Because if you think about certain study-specific executions, you still have to undertake those, and you really can't do it at the macro level. You can only take advantage of some of these things at the sub-study level. So we have to deploy a bunch of novel technologies, and when we say we have to, we wanted to. We didn't want to be married to one ecosystem. We didn't want an enterprise solution. It limits you in terms of best-in-class point solutions that you can incorporate into the way you execute the program. So all these things that I mentioned earlier, we don't have time to go into them, but we used best-in-class point solutions, or the only solutions that were available at the time, to allow us to effectively take advantage of e-clinical technologies that allowed us to operate this system in a way that no one else was able to either construct or made available now, right? And it's still not available now relative to master trials in the way that we designed it and executed it. And we'll just give you one example right now on the next slide, which is all this information had to be lumped in to a data lake and absorbed and presented in a way that allowed us to make NASA-like mission control decisions about all of these verticals that have to play into the overall operations of the program. And you have to do this at the sub-study level, you have to do it at the master trial level, and you have to do it at the next master trial level, because you think of LS, we're running multiple ones. So this is an early version snapshot of it. Doesn't look like it now. We've enhanced this much more. But the concept behind it is we were able to marry genomics data and operational data and make decisions in terms of each of the sub-studies and how it looks overall relative to what we expected to see in terms of the patients and the execution of the program. And clearly, if you can see it this way, you're going to make decisions, right? And there are all these different views that we've created. So we took the leader in the space, Summit Technologies, and we customized this. We're on probably version 6 or 7 already of this, right? Because you're constantly improving, you're constantly bolting on new technology solution, ingesting those data. Sometimes they don't have APIs, sometimes you have to get CSVs and marry them in. But we have said we're not going to be limited by point solutions and whether they allow us to connect in. We're going to figure out a way to get the information into a near real or early stage with cohorts or early decisions that have to be made. And you don't have time to go out and collect this data or analyze this data because you have to make timely decisions with novel breakthrough therapeutics. So I'm keeping an eye on time, and I've got a few more minutes. So here's the vision, right? We basically say this is the way clinical trials need to be done going forward. I demonstrated to you why the plug and play makes most sense financially and clearly operationally as well, right? And we've bolted on ways in which to execute the program that were not available when we started, but we layered them into the way we execute. And we're at the point now where we actually have EMR right, to EDC. So health records that are structured pipe over to our electronic data capture. Now, is it fully done yet? No. Is it for most of the structured? It's for all structured data? Yes. About half the data elements come over automatically. And obviously, we're working on the ones that don't come over automatically by NLP. So it allows us real-time, efficacy and safety evaluations that are needed for early-stage cancer trials. And we've eliminated CRAs. We don't send anyone to the sites. Okay, all this data comes to us either through source upload or piping. And we also take a look at what's going on at the sites through our electronic investigator site folders in a way that we now look into investigational drug dispensing through Investigo software. These have never been used before to actually allow us to run these studies remotely, and we're the first ones that have done this and done this effectively to allow us to essentially run these programs with near real-time data with automatic integration at a remote level. So I want to leave you with one or two thoughts, which says it's not a typical clinical trial. I think we demonstrated it. We're clearly nimble because we've made all these adjustments on the fly, introduced obviously new partners and new vendors as we execute. And I might add to you that at the end of last year, we actually presented the data at ASH, and we actually showed that this approach to clinical trials in frontline AML extended survival, okay, between 4 and 5-fold over traditional standard of care. So let that hit home for a minute. 4 to 5 times. So we're not talking about these typical trials where, we extended survival from, 4 weeks to 6 weeks, but we had enough patients to show it's statistically significant. Nope, that's not what we're about, and that's not what we're about in our next clinical programs. So you can tell that the decision making is quick, and it's a small group at LLS that runs this. And the parting thoughts, some of you might have seen this before. When you innovate, it says, "Don't worry, be crappy." This is Guy Kawasaki at Apple said this. When you're going up by layers, by steps, not by steps, by floors, by buildings, right? And you change the paradigm, you're going to have some crappiness along the way. But if you go ahead and you version the hell out of what you're doing and learn about it and make changes along the way. We've done that for 4+ years now, right? This is not someone who's just starting out, right? We challenged everything, and we have demonstrated the fact that we do it faster, we do it cheaper, with higher quality, and we save lives, right? So this is a model that I would urge everyone to think about as you move ahead with clinical trials. So I think that's it. That's my half hour. There you go. Efficient, timely presentation, and I'll turn it back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Len. And as he mentioned, his slide deck will be available. If you want a copy, you can email myself, Sherry, or the rest of my team. And if there's any questions for Len, the floor is now open. Okay, so it looks like don't have any questions, but if we do, Len, we will email you the questions over and you can connect with them directly.
Sure, sounds fine.
Thank you so much, Len.
Okay, hope everyone enjoyed seeing the office too. I know that when you're presenting and you have that virtual screen I could have put up. I wanted to show a little bit of the environment, so in case I was bored, you could go around my office and kind of check out all the artifacts that I have and try and figure out how I work.
No, it's a very good setup, definitely.
All right, so I'm leaving. Is that it? We're off, over and out?
Over and out. Thank you.